The day the Astra ships appeared in Earth's sky changed everything. They came without warning. 3 massive vessels that blocked out the sun like metal clouds. The world held its breath as they hovered above major cities, their hulls gleaming with an otherworldly sheen. Dr. Jack Miller watched the news footage from his lab, coffee growing cold in his hand. As one of Earth's leading geneticists, he expected a call. It came 3 hours later. "We need you in Washington," the voice said. Now, 2 days later, Jack stood in a hastily prepared conference room, alongside Earth's most influential leaders. Across the polished table sat the Astra delegation. Jack tried not to stare, but it was impossible not to. The Astra women towered over even the tallest humans, standing well over 7 feet tall. Their skin had a faint purple sheen, and their eyes, large with vertical pupils, seemed to look through rather than at the humans. They moved with a fluid grace that made humans seem clumsy by comparison. Ambassador Lyra, the Astra leader, spoke first. Her voice was melodic but cold. "We have watched your kind for some time," she said through a translator device. "Your technology is quaint. Your lifespans are brief. Your bodies are weak." Her gaze swept across the room, lingering on Jack for a moment too long. The Earth representatives shifted uncomfortably. The president attempted diplomacy. "We welcome peaceful contact and hope to learn from each other." A sound like tinkling glass filled the room. Jack realized the Astra were laughing. "Learn?" Lyra said. "What could we possibly learn from such fragile creatures? Your bodies break easily. Your minds work slowly. Your wars are constant. Your climate is collapsing because you couldn't control your own technology." Jack felt his face grow hot. He had spent his life pushing the boundaries of human potential through genetics. To hear his species dismissed so casually stung deeply. One of the other Astra, a scientist named Vela based on her insignia, stepped forward. "We do not come seeking your wisdom," she said. "We come because we need resources and research partners." She activated a holographic display showing complex genetic structures. "Our species faces a crisis. Our birth rates have fallen for generations. Without intervention, we face extinction within 5 centuries. The room fell silent. Jack leaned forward, his scientific curiosity overcoming his injured pride. The genetic markers were unlike anything he'd seen, but the problem was clear. Their reproductive system was failing at the cellular level. "We have searched many worlds," Lyra continued. "Your planet has materials we need. In exchange, we offer technology. This is not friendship. This is necessity." An older man at the table, General Wilson, spoke up. "And if we refuse?" Lyra's expression didn't change. "Then we take what we need. Your weapons cannot harm our ships." The meeting continued for hours, terms negotiated, threats veiled. Jack said little, but his mind raced. He studied the genetic data still hovering in the air. Something about it nagged at him, a pattern just beyond recognition. As the meeting concluded, Lyra approached Jack directly. She towered over him, her frame casting him in shadow. You are their genetic expert." Her tone made the title sound like an insult. Jack straightened his back. "I am. How sad," she said, "that your greatest minds still know so little." She handed him a data crystal. "Study our problem if you wish. Perhaps in a few hundred years, your kind might understand it." Jack accepted the crystal without a word, his fingers tight around it. As the Astra delegation left, he heard them making those tinkling laugh sounds again. That night, in his lab, Jack loaded the crystal's contents. The genetic information was vast and complex. But as dawn broke, he found himself smiling for the first time since the ships arrived. Because he had spotted something the Astra had missed. Something about human DNA that might just wipe those smug looks off their purple faces. Jack didn't leave his lab for 6 days. He slept on the small cot in the corner, ate from the vending machine down the hall, and worked until his eyes burned. The Astra data was like a puzzle with pieces from a dozen different boxes. But Jack was good at puzzles. On the seventh day, his friend and colleague Thomas knocked loudly on the lab door. "You look terrible," Thomas said when Jack finally opened up. "When's the last time you showered?" Jack ran a hand through his greasy hair and shrugged. "I'm busy." Thomas set down a paper bag that smelled like real food. "Busy proving something to tall purple aliens who think you're stupid." "They are stupid," Jack said, turning back to his screens. "Look at this." Thomas peered at the complex genetic models floating in the air. "What am I looking at?" "The answer," Jack said, eyes bright with discovery. "Human DNA has something the Astra don't, something they probably had once but lost." He pulled up two genetic structures side by side. One human, one Astra. "See this sequence? It's adaptive, flexible. Our DNA can repair itself in ways theirs can't. Their reproductive genes are too rigid, too specialized. That's why they're failing." Thomas whistled. "You figured this out in a week." "They gave me a head start with their data. They just weren't looking at it right." Jack pointed to another screen. "I think I can create a therapy. Use human genetic material as a template to restore their reproductive function." "Should you?" Thomas asked quietly. They weren't exactly friendly. Jack paused. The memory of Lyra's condescending laugh still burned. "Part of me wants to let them figure it out themselves. Let them see how primitive we are while they slowly die out." "But the better part of you won't do that," Thomas said. Jack sighed. "No, the better part won't." 3 days later, a message came from the Astra Embassy. A scientific envoy wanted to review Earth's research facilities. Jack was ordered to host the visit at his lab. The envoy was Vela, the scientist from the first meeting. Up close, she was even more intimidating, nearly 8 feet tall with powerful muscles visible beneath her sleek uniform. She ducked to enter Jack's lab. "This is smaller than expected," she said, looking around with thinly veiled disdain. "We make do with what we have," Jack replied evenly. Vela picked up a microscope, turning it in her long fingers as if it were a child's toy. "Quaint. We haven't used optical technology in centuries." Jack bit his tongue. "Would you like to see what I've been working on?" "If you insist," she said, sounding bored. Jack brought up his findings on the main screen. He explained his discovery about human DNA's adaptive qualities, the potential application for the Astra fertility crisis, and his preliminary design for a gene therapy. Vela's expression remained neutral, but her eyes, those strange vertical pupils, widened slightly. "This is unexpected," she admitted. "Is that Astra for impressive?" Jack couldn't help asking. Vela's mouth tightened. "It is Astra for requires verification. Your understanding of genetics is more advanced than we anticipated, but this solution seems too simple." "Sometimes the simplest answers are the right ones," Jack said. "Your people have been overthinking the problem." Vela stared at him for a long moment. "I will take this data back for analysis. If it has merit, you will be contacted again." After she left, Thomas came by the lab. "How'd it go with the purple giant?" Jack grinned. She didn't laugh this time. 2 weeks passed with no word. Jack tried to return to his regular work, but his mind kept turning back to the Astra problem. Had he missed something? Were they testing his solution without telling him? Then one morning, he arrived at his lab to find Vela waiting. Behind her stood 2 more Astra, wearing formal attire he hadn't seen before. "Dr. Miller," Vela said, using his title for the first time. "The High Council has reviewed your work." Jack braced himself. "They wish to fund a joint research project," she continued, her voice tight, as if the words pained her. "But on our terms, on our world." Jack blinked in surprise. "You want me to go to, where exactly?" "Kepler 186F, Vela replied. "Our home." Jack looked at the tall aliens, then at his small lab, then back again. A smile spread slowly across his face. "When do we leave?" The journey to Kepler 186 took 3 weeks in the Astra ship. Jack spent most of that time studying. The gravity would be stronger there, the air thinner, the days longer. His body would need time to adjust, and he wasn't sure how much time the Astra would give him. 5 human scientists accompanied him, experts in various fields. They were the first humans to travel beyond the solar system, though none of them felt much like celebrating. The Astra crew treated them like cargo, not historic pioneers. Jack's quarters were small but comfortable. A viewing screen showed the stars streaking by, a constant reminder of how far he was going, how alone he would be. Thomas had tried to talk him out of it. "They'll take your work and discard you," his friend had warned. "Or worse, they'll keep you as some kind of pet scientist." "I need to see this through," Jack had replied. He didn't explain the real reason, that he needed to see the look on their faces when his therapy worked. When the mighty Astra had to admit that a primitive human had saved them, the ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel with a stomach-turning lurch. Jack stumbled to the viewing screen and saw it for the first time. The Astra homeworld, a beautiful blue-green planet circling a red dwarf star. "Prepare for landing," a cold voice announced over the speakers. The descent was smoother than Jack expected. When the doors opened, he took his first breath of alien air. It was sweet and thin, like breathing at high altitude. The gravity pulled at his muscles, making each step an effort. A delegation waited on the landing pad. At their center stood Lyra, the ambassador who had first mocked humanity. She looked even more imposing on her home turf. "Dr. Miller," she said, not offering any gesture of greeting. "Welcome to the heart of the Astra Dominion." Jack looked around at the sprawling city beyond the spaceport. Towering crystal structures caught the red light of the star, sending rainbows dancing across metallic streets. Astra moved about with fluid grace, most of them female. The few males he saw were smaller, dressed in plain clothes, eyes downcast. "Your accommodation has been prepared," Lyra continued. "Your laboratory is fully stocked according to your specifications. You will begin work tomorrow." "No rest for the weak humans?" Jack asked with a thin smile. Lyra's expression didn't change. "You requested this opportunity. Do not waste our time." The laboratory exceeded Jack's expectations. It was 3 times the size of his facility on Earth, with equipment he had only dreamed of using. A team of Astra scientists waited for him, all female, all regarding him with thinly veiled contempt. "I am Vela," the familiar scientist stepped forward. "I will oversee your work." "Supervise, you mean," Jack corrected. "As you wish," she gestured to the others. "These will assist you." One of the Astra, shorter than the others, but still towering over Jack, spoke up. "I have studied your preliminary work, the adaptive sequence you identified. It's an interesting theory." Jack looked at her in surprise. It was the first time any Astra had acknowledged his work without dismissal. "I'm Jack," he said, extending a hand before remembering that Astra didn't shake hands. "Mira," she replied, hesitating before briefly touching his hand with hers. Her skin was cool and smooth. Vela made a disapproving sound. "Begin your work, Dr. Miller. Prove your theory or admit failure. Those are your only options." The days blurred together. Jack worked long hours, pushing through the physical discomfort of the higher gravity. The Astra worked longer, needing less rest than humans. All except Mira avoided speaking to him beyond what was necessary for the research. One night, when the others had left, Mira stayed behind. "May I ask you something, Dr. Miller?" Jack looked up from his microscope. "Sure." "And it's just Jack." "Jack," she tested the name. "Why are you helping us, after how we treated your kind?" He considered lying, considered giving some noble answer about scientific cooperation. Instead, he told the truth. "Partly to prove I could, partly because it's the right thing to do." He shrugged. "And partly because I'm a scientist. This is the greatest puzzle I've ever tried to solve." Mira was quiet for a moment. "I volunteered for this project," she finally said. "Not because I believe in your theory, but because—" She faltered. "Because," Jack prompted. Mira's purple skin darkened slightly. Because I want a child. I have tried all Astra treatments. None worked. You are my last hope. Jack suddenly saw her differently, not as an arrogant alien, but as a woman desperate for something many humans took for granted. I'll do my best, he promised. For the first time since he'd arrived on this strange world, he saw an Astra smile. 3 months passed on the alien world. Jack's body slowly adjusted to the heavier gravity. His muscles grew stronger, his breathing deeper. But the work was taking its toll. Each failure brought scorn from Vela and the other Astra scientists. Only Mira remained supportive. The genetic sequencing is rejecting the human markers, Jack muttered, staring at the failed test results on the screen. It was his 12th attempt. Each one showed promise, then collapsed. Perhaps there is something we are missing, Mira suggested. She had taken to working late with him, long after the others left. Jack rubbed his tired eyes. The adaptive sequence works in theory, but the Astra immune response is killing it before it can integrate. Mira moved closer, examining the data. Jack had grown used to her nearness, no longer intimidated by her height or strength. He had come to see her intelligence, her quiet determination. What if, she began, then stopped herself. Go on, Jack encouraged. There are no bad ideas at this point. What if we need more than genetic material? What if we need something else from humans? Her voice dropped lower. Something. Alive. Jack's exhaustion vanished. Living cells. Of course. He jumped up, suddenly energized. Not just DNA sequences, but actual living human stem cells as a framework. He worked through the night, Mira at his side. By morning, they had a new prototype therapy. We'll need to test it, Jack said. I volunteer, Mira responded immediately. Jack hesitated. It's not without risk. We don't know how your body will respond to living human cells. I told you why I'm here, she said firmly. This is my choice. Before Jack could respond, the lab door slid open. Vela entered with 2 other senior astroscientists. Her gaze moved between Jack and Mira, narrowing suspiciously. The High Council requests a progress report, she announced. They grow impatient with delays. Jack straightened. We have a breakthrough. A new approach using living human stem cells as a framework for the therapy. Vela's expression darkened. Living human material? You propose to taint our species with your living essence. It's not tainting, Jack argued. It's healing. The cells will guide the genetic restructuring, then deteriorate naturally. Unacceptable, one of the other scientists said. Our directive was to extract useful information from human genetics, not to mix our species. Jack felt his temper rising. Your directive was to solve your fertility crisis. I'm offering a solution. A primitive solution that would make us dependent on humans, Vela snapped. We will not become breeders reliant on your species. Mira stepped forward. I have volunteered to test the therapy. The room fell silent. Vela stared at Mira with something like horror. You would accept human cells in your body. Have you lost all pride in your Astra heritage? I have lost all hope of motherhood, Mira replied evenly. Until now. The following days were tense. Word of the new therapy spread through the research facility. Jack noticed whispers when he walked the halls, felt hostile eyes following him. One morning, he arrived at the lab to find equipment damaged, samples destroyed. Security footage had mysteriously failed. They fear what they don't understand, Mira said, helping him clean up the mess. Jack looked at her. Are you afraid? She met his eyes. I fear dying without ever creating life. I fear the end of my species because of pride. They rebuilt the samples in secret, working in a smaller lab that Mira secured for them. Jack modified the therapy, making it more efficient, more stable. When it was ready, they both knew what came next. The procedure was simple. Jack injected the living therapy into Mira's bloodstream. The human stem cells, programmed with the adaptive genetic sequence, would seek out her reproductive system and rebuild what had deteriorated over generations. Now we wait, Jack said when it was done. That night, alarms blared throughout the facility. Jack rushed from his quarters to find security forces at Mira's door. "What's happening?" he demanded. A tall Astra guard blocked his path. "The rogue scientist is showing signs of severe cellular reaction. High Command has ordered her quarantine." Jack pushed past, ignoring the risk. Inside, Mira lay on her bed, her purple skin hot with fever, her breathing shallow. "What have you done to her?" Vela accused from the doorway. Jack ignored her, checking Mira's vital signs. "It's not rejection," he said, relief washing over him as he read the medical scanner. "It's integration. Her body is adapting." Mira's eyes fluttered open, finding Jack's face. "Is it working?" she whispered. Jack nodded, a smile breaking across his tired face. "Your reproductive system is rebuilding itself. The human cells are doing exactly what they're supposed to do." Mira closed her eyes, a tear sliding down her purple cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. News of Mira's treatment spread through the Astra capital like wildfire. For the first 2 weeks, she remained in isolation while her body adjusted to the changes. Jack visited daily, monitoring her progress through a protective barrier. The changes were remarkable. Her reproductive system was rebuilding itself, cell by cell. "The Council demands to see you," Vela informed Jack on the 15th day. Her tone was cold, but different somehow. Less dismissive, more cautious. The High Council chamber was vast, with curved walls that reached toward a domed ceiling painted with stars. 7 tall Astra women sat on raised platforms, looking down at Jack, with expressions ranging from disgust to reluctant curiosity. "Dr. Miller," the center figure began. It was Lyra, the ambassador. "You have performed an unauthorized procedure on one of our scientists." Jack stood his ground. "A procedure she volunteered for, to solve the very crisis I was brought here to address. By contaminating her with human biological material," another counselor spat. "By saving her reproductive system," Jack corrected, "and potentially saving your entire species." Lyra leaned forward. "The subject appears to be responding well. Her body is accepting the changes, but we cannot approve wider use without understanding the long-term effects." "The therapy is working exactly as designed," Jack said. "The human stem cells are providing a framework for repair, then naturally diminishing as the Astra cells take over. In a few months, there will be no trace of human cells left, just a functional Astra reproductive system." A third counselor spoke up. "And if we were to approve this treatment for wider use, what would you require from Earth?" Jack had been anticipating this question. "Nothing." The council members exchanged glances. "I will provide the complete formula and process," Jack continued. "Your scientists can produce it here. No dependency on Earth. No ongoing connection required." "Why?" Lyra asked, genuine confusion in her voice. "Why would you give this freely, after how we have treated your kind?" Jack smiled thinly. "Consider it a gesture of goodwill from a species you underestimated." The council deliberated for hours while Jack waited outside. When they finally called him back, their decision was clear from their rigid postures. "The treatment will be studied further," Lyra announced. "Mira's case will be monitored closely. If she remains stable, we will consider wider trials." It wasn't the outright approval Jack had hoped for, but it was a start. When he returned to his quarters, he found his communication system active. Thomas's face appeared on the screen, the signal delayed by the vast distance between worlds. "Jack, finally." His friend looked relieved. "We haven't heard from you in weeks. How's it going up there with the purple giants?" Jack grinned. "It's working, Thomas. The therapy is working." He explained Mira's treatment and the council's cautious response. Thomas shook his head in wonder. "So you'll be coming home soon?" "Mission accomplished." Jack hesitated. "Not yet. I need to see this through. Make sure there are no complications." The truth was more complex than he wanted to admit. He couldn't leave Mira now. couldn't leave until he knew she would be all right. A month passed. Mira was released from isolation, her body now stable, the changes complete. Scans confirmed what they had hoped. Her reproductive system was fully functional for the first time in her life. "How do you feel?" Jack asked when they were alone in the lab. "Different," she said softly. "Complete." She hesitated, then added, "I have found a mate willing to try for a child." Jack felt an unexpected pang, but masked it with a smile. "That's wonderful." He is progressive, not bothered by the human aspect of my treatment. She touched Jack's hand briefly. "Without you, this would not be possible." More Astra came forward after Mira's success, asking for the treatment. At first just a handful, then dozens. The council reluctantly approved a limited trial, unable to ignore the demand. Jack worked tirelessly, refining the process, training Astra medical staff. But he began to notice something odd in the follow-up data. The Astra who received the treatment showed subtle brain chemistry changes. Nothing dangerous, but unexpected. "What does it mean?" Mira asked when he showed her the results. "I'm not sure yet," Jack admitted. "The changes are in regions associated with empathy, emotional processing." Vela entered the lab, her manner now brisk but respectful. "The first wave of treated Astra have begun attempting conception," she reported. "We should have results soon." 1 week later, the news arrived. 5 Astra women, including Mira, had successfully conceived. It was the first natural conception in the species in nearly a century. The atmosphere in the capital changed overnight. Jack was no longer met with hostile glares, but with curious, sometimes hopeful looks. Even Vela's frigid demeanor had thawed slightly. "Your treatment works," she acknowledged stiffly. "The council has approved full deployment." Jack should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt uneasy. The brain chemistry changes haunted him. What exactly had his human cells done to the Astra? And what would it mean for the children they would bear? 3 months after the first successful pregnancies, tensions erupted across the Astra capital. Jack watched from his lab window as protesters filled the streets below. Some carried signs supporting the treatment, others denounced it as human contamination. The division grew sharper each day. "They call themselves the purists," Mira explained, resting a hand on her growing belly. Her pregnancy was progressing well, her body adapting to the changes with remarkable resilience. "They believe the treatment will destroy Astra culture." "By allowing you to have children?" Jack asked incredulously. "By changing who we are." Mira's expression grew troubled. "The brain chemistry alterations you discovered. Word has spread." Jack had continued studying the unexpected side effect. The changes were subtle but consistent across all treated Astra. Regions of the brain associated with empathy, emotional bonding, and nurturing behavior showed increased activity. Nothing dangerous, but definitely not part of the original design. "The High Council has called an emergency session," Vela announced, entering the lab. Her attitude toward Jack had transformed over the months from contempt to grudging respect. "They request your presence, Dr. Miller." The council chamber was crowded, with observers packing the viewing galleries. Jack felt their eyes on him as he walked to the center of the floor. Lyra sat in the chief counselor's position, her face unreadable. "Dr. Miller," she began, "you have given us the gift of fertility. But some claim you have also given us something we did not ask for, a change to our very nature." Jack stood straight, despite the heavy gravity that still strained his earthborn muscles. The brain chemistry changes were unexpected, but they appear to be beneficial, enhancing the bond between mother and child. "Astra have never needed such enhancement," one counselor argued. "Our society has thrived for millennia with our natural emotional structure. A society that was dying out," Jack reminded them. "Maybe the loss of these neural pathways is connected to your fertility crisis. Maybe your ancestors had these same pathways." Debate raged through the chamber. Outside, the sounds of protests grew louder. Jack caught words like contamination and human influence rising from the crowd. Suddenly, A loud explosion rocked the building. Alarms blared as council security rushed in. "The medical center has been attacked," a guard reported. "The stored treatment samples have been destroyed." Chaos erupted in the chamber. Jack pushed through the crowd, racing toward the research facility. Smoke billowed from one wing of the building. Emergency crews were already working to contain the blaze. "The backup samples," Jack yelled to Vela, who had followed him. "Are they secure?" She shook her head, genuine concern in her eyes. They were all stored in the same location. Jack felt a surge of anger. Months of work, destroyed by fear and ignorance. Then he remembered he had kept one small sample hidden in his personal lab storage, a precaution against just such an attack. As they approached the damaged building, a group of tall Astra blocked their path. Their expressions were hostile, their stance aggressive. "The human poisoner," one snarled. "He changes our children before they are even born." Jack stood his ground, though the group towered over him. "I'm saving your species from extinction. Better extinction than corruption." The leader stepped forward, raising what looked like a weapon. Vela moved suddenly, placing herself between Jack and the threat. "He is under council protection," she declared. "Step aside." The moment hung in balance. Then, from behind the group, a voice rang out. "Stop this madness." The crowd parted. Mira approached, her pregnancy now visible, her usually gentle face fierce with determination. "Look at me," she commanded the protesters. "I am carrying new life, the future of our people. Would you destroy that future out of fear?" The leader hesitated, weapon still raised. "The human has changed you. You speak with emotion, not reason." "I speak as a mother," Mira replied, "something our world has nearly forgotten." More security forces arrived, surrounding the protesters. The immediate danger passed, but Jack knew the conflict was far from over. That night, Jack worked furiously in his private lab, using the single remaining sample to restart production of the treatment. His hands shook with exhaustion. "You should rest," Vela said, watching from the doorway. Jack shook his head. "Can't. Too many women are waiting for this treatment." Vela studied him with those strange vertical pupils. "You care deeply about this. About us. Despite how we treated you." Jack paused, considering her words. "I'm a doctor first, a human second." "Perhaps," Vela said slowly, "we have more to learn from humans than just genetics." As dawn broke over the alien city, Jack finally stepped back from his work. The new batch of treatment was ready. And something else had changed overnight. Vela had officially requested to be the next recipient. 1 year later, Jack stood in the nursery of the Astra Central Medical Facility, surrounded by the impossible. 20 small cribs, each holding a healthy Astra infant. The first generation born after the treatment. The first natural births in over a century. "They are thriving," the nurse informed him, pride evident in her voice. Once she would have spoken to him with disdain. Now, there was respect, perhaps even warmth. Jack moved among the cribs, studying each child. They looked like pure Astra, tall for infants, with faint purple skin and those distinctive eyes. But there was something different about them, too. Something in the way they responded to touch, to voices, to each other. "Dr. Miller." Mira's voice came from the doorway. She carried her own child, a daughter, wrapped in soft fabric against her chest. "The council is ready for you." Jack nodded, taking one last look at the nursery before following her. The past year had transformed the Astra capital. The protests had eventually died down as more and more women received the treatment, as more babies were born healthy and strong. The results were impossible to argue with. The council chamber felt different this time. Less hostile, less cold. Lyra sat in the center seat, but gone was the contemptuous expression she had worn when they first met on Earth. "Dr. Miller," she began, "1 year ago, you offered our people a gift we did not fully understand. Today, we acknowledge that gift in its entirety." Jack stood quietly, waiting. The brain chemistry changes, Lyra continued, which caused such concern, have proven to be beneficial. Our new mothers display nurturing behaviors that have been lost to our species for generations. The children show signs of heightened emotional intelligence, stronger bonds, greater empathy. An older counselor spoke up. We have examined our ancient texts. There are indications that our ancestors once displayed these same traits before our evolutionary path diverged. Jack nodded. It was as he had suspected. The treatment hadn't added anything foreign to the Astra. It had restored something they had lost. We have drafted a new treaty with Earth, Lyra announced, one based on mutual respect and cooperation. And we would like you, Dr. Miller, to serve as our ambassador. Jack was stunned. I'm a scientist, not a diplomat. You are the human who changed our future, Lyra replied. The human who proved that strength comes in many forms. Outside the chamber, Jack paused at a viewing window. Below, in a garden that had once been closed to off-worlders, Astra mothers gathered with their children. Among them was Vela, her own pregnancy now visible. She had been one of the last to accept the treatment, her pride finally giving way to the desire for a child. Will you stay? Mira asked, coming to stand beside him. Her daughter reached out, tiny fingers grasping at Jack's much smaller human hand. I don't know, Jack admitted. Earth is still my home. You have a home here too now, Mira said softly, among the people you saved. That evening, Jack made a call to Earth. Thomas's face appeared on the screen, lines of worry etched around his eyes. Jack, we've been hearing strange rumors. Something about protests, attacks. Are you all right? I'm fine, Jack assured him. Things were tense for a while, but they've settled now. The treatment worked. Better than I could have hoped. Thomas studied his friend's face. You look different. Stronger. Jack laughed. It's the gravity. Builds muscle. When are you coming home? Thomas asked. Jack hesitated, looking around at what had been his quarters for nearly 2 years now. That's actually why I'm calling. They've asked me to stay on. As an ambassador. Thomas's eyebrows shot up. The same aliens who thought humans were primitive weaklings want you as their ambassador. People change, Jack said simply. Species change. Later, as Jack walked through the capital city in the red light of the setting star, he passed a memorial that had been erected outside the medical center. It depicted a human hand and an Astra hand reaching toward each other. The inscription read in both languages, strength found in difference, life born of understanding. A group of Astra women approached, each carrying a child. They stopped, recognizing him. Once, they would have looked down on him, literally and figuratively. Now they inclined their heads in a gesture of respect. The human doctor, one whispered to her child. The one who made you possible. Jack nodded in acknowledgement, continuing his walk. He had come to this world to prove a point, to show these arrogant aliens that humans weren't as weak as they thought. He had succeeded beyond his wildest expectations. But somewhere along the way, the point had stopped mattering. What mattered were the children, the future, the understanding between two very different species that had found common ground in the most fundamental thing of all, the desire to create life, to nurture it, to see it grow. As the red star dipped below the horizon, Jack made his decision. He would stay, at least for a while. There was still much work to be done, and much to learn from each other.